Welcome to Introduction to Philosophy. My name is David Norman. I'm going to be your instructor this term. I'm excited about that. We've got 8 weeks to cover a long period of time and a lot of information. So let's jump right in. The first group of philosophers we're going to cover this week are the pre-Socratic thinkers. Now, just so we're clear, by pre, I mean before, and Socratic, I mean Socrates. So these are the philosophers that existed in the 5th and 6th centuries BC before Socrates. Now, it's important that you know, number one, that we don't have any complete works of any of these authors. We do have snippets, we do have quotes. Usually it's what someone else has written that they said, but we don't have any of their complete works. It's important that you understand that they had various interests, that their thoughts span the entire spectrum of what you might think someone could think about. They thought about and wrote their thoughts on philosophy, metaphysics, theology, cosmology, physics, mathematics, epistemology, medicine, zoology, biology, anatomy, ethics, and even politics. But what we really have that they wrote down, what we really have that they believed, is what they believed to be the most fundamental element in the universe. What they believed that if you broke everything down as far as you could, what you might have left. And so I want you to know these for your quiz. You need to know that for Thales, he believed that if you broke everything down, you ended up with water. Or that Anaximenes, if you broke everything down, you had mist or air. Or Anaximander, that you had the infinite, right? Or Pythagoras, which you, in your mathematics studies, you may have come across the Pythagorean theorem. It's this guy, that Pythagoras, for him, everything broke down to numbers. That for Heraclitus, it broke down into the divine logos and constant change. We'll come back to that. Or Parmenides. Parmenides believed that if you broke everything down, ultimately you found that the only thing left was what was eternal and what was real. And then you have Empedocles. I'm going to go with that pronunciation. It's kind of like Old Testament names. You say them fast, you say them with certainty, and you hope for the best, right? So Empedocles believed that if you broke everything down, you ended up with the 4 basic elements and then this back and forth of love and strife. And then finally you have Democritus and Leucippus, who believed that if you broke everything down, you found atoms, which actually is kind of a thing, right? That we're all made of atoms. So they were the first atomists. If you're going to focus on the pre-Socratic thinkers, then it's also important to think about the Socratic thinker, the original, the OG, Socrates. Socrates lived from 470 to 399 BC. Now, Socrates never actually wrote anything. You should probably know that what we have of his teachings was recorded by his student Plato and Plato's contemporary Xenophon. So what we have of Socrates' teaching, we have been handed that down from them. And it's important that you understand that Socrates disagreed with the sophists of his day. Now, sophists, that name comes from the Greek word sophia, for wisdom. And the sophists were, frankly, they were everything that we might think of is stereotypical of philosophers, right? The guys who think about thinking. The guys who kind of waste the day away pretending to be in deep thought, really using a lot of words not to say a whole lot. That's kind of who these sophists were. Socrates disagreed with them. He believed that the purpose of philosophy was to find truth, that it was an examination and an exploration to find the truth, not just to display this domination over your hearers. He was arrested and ultimately put to death, and the charge against him was that he was teaching and encouraging atheism to the youth. The reality is, probably that wasn't the case. That he was encouraging them to think and not to serve and worship the Greek gods and the Greek pantheon as they understood it in that day. I want you to know about Plato. Now, Plato was born in 428 and lived until 348 BC. Plato came from an aristocratic family, so he was of the wealthy class. He was an artist and a poet earlier in his life. He had become acquainted with Heraclitean philosophers, and as a young man, and he had also, again, been a student of Socrates. It's important to know he also studied a bit with the Pythagoreans. And so these thinkers, these philosophers had schools. These philosophers had other people thinking along the same veins and along the same lines that they were. And it was Plato who opened a school that he called the Academy. Now, when you think of Plato's thought and what he taught, you need to understand that he synthesized the teaching of Heraclitus and Parmenides. So what he believed, that the world is clearly transitory, so it's constantly in motion, and anything that's in motion means that change is going to happen. But he believed that just because something changed didn't mean that that thing didn't continue to exist. And so what he said was that things have identities that persist through change, so there must be a world that doesn't change where those realities exist. This is hard thinking, right? It's hard thinking. But this is where we begin to see his allegory of the cave, and this is where he talks about forms. And so let's think about forms. Plato believed that everyone is a pre-existent eternal soul. I'm pre-existent, you're pre-existent, I'm eternal, you're eternal. Everything is a pre-existent eternal soul. And what he believes that this world was molded from pre-existent matter. So this is not what Christianity teaches, that God created all things ex nihilo, out of nothing. He believed that the world was molded from pre-existent matter by a demiurge studying the forms. So think of a painter, right? A painter standing in front of a portrait, and he's painting the portrait. But in order to paint the portrait appropriately, he has to look at the subject of his painting. So we think of portraits being painted. So of Benjamin Franklin's sitting here, and the man's painting Benjamin Franklin. So Benjamin Franklin here would be the form, and this would be what the demiurge was creating. That's how Plato believed the world worked. That the world was kind of put together by this demiurge, by this godlike person who saw the way it was supposed to be, and then kind of formed this in order to match that. And so what he believed was that the forms are the absolute essences of all things that exist in a world of permanence, which is not what we have in this world. Now, as I said, Plato believed that we are pre-existent eternal souls. Because we are pre-existent eternal souls, what he believes is that we used to exist floating around and studying the forms, the permanent, the fixed, until our soul fell into the material world. And when that soul enters into the body, it forgets everything about the forms. How he remembered it, I'm not quite sure, but that's what he taught. And as what he says is, as we learn here on this earth, we're actually remembering the things that we already know from our time in the forms. And so we're not actually learning something for the first time. We're realizing something that we've already known, or we're remembering instead. And so what he says is that our gaps in knowledge are really just gaps in memory. Because ultimately, you can't know what you don't know. So his whole point is, you have to have already been accustomed and introduced to these forms in order to later on the earth have a realization about those forms, because you can't know what doesn't already exist and that you know doesn't already exist. And what he believed is that that soul is trapped in the body on this earth as long as you're alive, and upon your death it returns to the forms when you die. One of the things that Plato is most famous for is what he believed, what he called the allegory of a cave. The allegory of the cave. And so what he said was, our understanding on this earth is kind of like a group of prisoners who had been chained in a cave behind a wall, but there's a fire on the other side of the wall, and occasionally what happens are these figures come across the fire, but the prisoners can't see the figures or the fire. All the prisoners can see are the shadows on the wall. And the prisoners believe those shadows to be the real things. And so as whatever passes in front of the fire casts its shadow, this is the real world for those prisoners. They were born in the prison. They don't know anything else. And then he says, but what should happen if one of the prisoners should wriggle free? The chain should break. And they go to the other side of the wall. And on the other side of the wall, they're still in the cave. But now what they begin to see are the items that passed before the fire, which is real. For them, the shadows are the real thing. So what are these? Not only that, but what is the fire? More so than that, what happens when they exit the cave and they see trees and buildings and the stuff outside the cave? What happens when they dare look up and see the sun? What is it that they believe to be real? And what happens when that person re-enters the cave to go tell the other prisoners exists? What would happen to the prisoners? Now, I'll tell you what I think. This may not be right, this may not be in your book, but I think he's sharing this in part to help explain why they killed Socrates, his teacher. Because for him, he believed Socrates exited the cave and saw reality and saw things the way they were. And Socrates came back into the cave and explained to them, but they were dull and dim and resistant and unwilling to listen. And that's why they killed him. Now, I put some more information in your notes. I have a PowerPoint for you to download so that you can study. I'm also going to put links to a couple YouTube videos that I didn't make. I'm going to admit that up front. I didn't make, but I found them helpful as I studied and looked at Plato, and I think you would find them helpful as well. So you definitely want to look at your download. You definitely want to watch those videos. The one about the cave I think is very helpful. And then there's the one about Plato's Republic that I want to talk to you about for just a second. So Plato wrote about this ideal civilization that he believed should exist. Now, as a philosopher, you might be super surprised to find out that he thinks it should be ruled by philosophers. I know, it's shocking. But what he believed is that this civilization should be held together by what he considered to be the noble lie. And this noble lie was a lie that was told to people, that was told to societies for their benefit. And this lie was that we're all born with this mixture of gold and silver and iron and brass in our souls. And the ones who had the higher proportion of valuable metals, the higher proportions of gold, the higher proportions of silver, well, those were more ruling class type people. And the people with more brass and with more iron, they were more in the lower classes. Now, what he believes is that it needed to have three classes. It needed to have three sections. You had your rulers, your kings, the philosophers, who had a lot of gold in their souls, right? And then the second level was you had warriors and soldiers and kind of assistants to the rulers, who they had a lower amount of gold, but a lot of silver, some stuff like that. And then you had the lower class, which was your farmers, your traders, your artisans, your craftsmen, and they were born with brass and iron. in their souls. Now, what he said was the lower classes, like they could procreate, they could marry, they could have kids and all those things. But the upper class, they couldn't do that because the upper class needed to live on behalf of and for the sake of the other classes. I think it's interesting in our day today that we kind of try, civilization and society tries to build itself in a similar manner. They try to create this ruling class who knows better than others know at a lower tier. And we should just listen to what they have to say because they're born better with more gold in their souls. And so Plato is a fascinating figure. Do your reading. Really read to understand. Don't just skim it. Don't just fly through it. Really read to understand. Watch the videos that I'm dropping into these weeks. Every week I'm going to try and provide a lecture, and then if I find something that I think is extra helpful, is beneficial to you to understand this material, I'm going to drop that in the course because I want to give you every opportunity, not just to succeed in your quizzes, not just to succeed in your papers, not just to succeed in your exams, not just to succeed in your final project, but to help you understand philosophy, because I don't want it to be something that you dread, and I don't want it to be a class that you felt like you had to take that you didn't get anything out of. I want it to be something that helps you look at the world around you, that helps you understand the world around you, and helps you understand not just how you think and what you think, but how and why other people are thinking the way they are. All right? Good luck. Get your quiz done. Get your paper in. I'll see you next week.